Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today, I have with me an amazing artist and an author, a thought leader, and I'm really looking forward to visiting with you. So, Mako is an arts advocate, a writer, a speaker who is recognized worldwide as a cultural influencer, a presidential appointee to the National Council on the Arts from 2003 to 2009. Fujimura served as an international advocate for the arts, speaking with decision makers and advising governmental policies on the arts. His books, Refractions and Culture Care, reflect many of his theses on advocacy written during that time. His books have won numerous awards, and his highly anticipated book, Art Plus Faith, A Theology of Making, has been described by poet Christian Willman as a real tonic for autonomized time. So, Mako, it's so great to have you here on the Voice of Influence podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of all the things that you do, and you do so many things, is there a way to describe the fullness of who you are and what you do without being reductionist?
Sure. I am an artist, and I have been since as far as I can remember. I have been privileged to make a living off of what I love to do, and so that's a miracle of some kind. And I write out of my studio experience. I speak out of my studio experience. So, and I obviously advocate for other artists out of my studio experience. So everything flows out of my studio.
Why out of your studio? What do you mean by that?
Well, that's where I sense God's presence when I'm working, when I'm making, when I use this very traditionally driven material base based on Japanese history, but what I do is contemporary. So I am mixing the old and the new. But when I paint, I feel God's presence here. It's the most sacred place that I know, and so everything, writing and any kind of advocacy I do flows out of that tangible experience of God's presence in my creativity.
So for those of you who are watching this video, there's this beautiful painting picture in the background. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at?
Yeah, so these are my series, Walking on Water, that came out of 2011 disaster in Japan, the Tohoku Great Earthquake and tsunami that washed away literally fishing villages that has been there for centuries, and many victims from that day, and the nuclear meltdown still continues, so it's not over. And I began the series called Walking on Water because I believe art asks deeper questions that we can't answer. Art deals with the impossibilities of even our longings and our hopes, and I believe in that honest questioning, we can find ourselves, and we might even find a voice of God speaking into that. So Walking on Water asks, can we walk on water? These large canvases are 7 by 11 feet. They are monumental works. I've done so far about 8 of these. And these are the newest ones that I did this last summer, and I'm hoping to show them in Los Angeles next spring. And also one of the Walking Water paintings adorn the cover of Art Plus Faith book that just came out of Yale Press, and so I have in the backdrop as my Zoom backdrop in the studio, inside the studio.
It's beautiful. Tell us about Art Plus Faith. What's the basic idea behind it, and why did you write it?
Art Plus Faith is my life work. I began to write this book a long time ago, beginning my journey in college, looking at the Bible as a non-believer, and then later on, as I heard the voice of Christ through literature and art and the Bible, and when I became a follower of Christ, I read the Bible through and through 3 times, and I found it to be amazing book about creativity and the love of this creator. And so I began to know things that turned out to be a little unusual in the context of churches. People usually don't read the details of Exodus 31, based on Horeb creating the mercy seat 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubit, and be excited by that. People say like, "Oh, what does that mean?" Well, I don't know what a cubit is, and like why. Why do you care about the measurements and materials? And I said, well, I can see it as an artist, and the reason why it's 2.5 cubit is a measurement of at the time, in Egyptian times, it was Pharaoh's arm from the tip of his finger to the elbow. That was a cubit. So every pyramid is built with different measurements. And whoever the leader is, that human measurement became accepted measurement. But so for mercy seat, they must measure Moses' arm, and because he was the leader who carried the design as well as the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, down from Mount Sinai. So I'm reading this and I'm like, this is incredible. That the fact that it is that size, 2.5 cubit, means that it is just too large for you to carry yourself. You're going to need help. And I was reflecting on the half, and the half signifies mercy, because God has to fill the other half. And all these observations I was making right away, but it didn't seem to affect too many of my friends that in the same kind of excitement that I had. So I began to write it down, and these observations over the years became this book.
That's so interesting. So of all the observations that you made, are there any that you would like to share with us besides the one that you just shared?
Oh, I mean, every page in the Bible, you can, as an artist, you see the artistry of God, amazing flip of a perspective that God makes through Christ. We are the masterpieces. We are the artwork. I am one dedicated to creating beautiful objects and art, but God is even more determined to create something this out of brokenness and darkness and failures and many things that will you would think is create this impossibility of being able to find hope, but God is the ultimate and perhaps the only true artist who does everything out of love, and that's the most incredible thing about the Bible. Is it's full of these designs and voices. Jesus himself, his voice was recognizable to me as an artist voice, one who understood exile, one who understood true beauty and true truth, and dared to speak against even the authorities at times when he needed to, and yet loved them, which is so incredible as an artist to hear that voice and to follow that voice. I can talk to you about hours and hours about details, and I focus on the shortest passage in the Bible, which is John 11:35. Jesus wept, and I spent quite a bit of time describing why that's so significant for me in this theology of making, what I call theology of making, which is really the theology of new creation.
So in your book Culture Care and in Art and Faith, you make a reference to the Industrial Revolution's impact in fostering a utilitarian pragmatism in our culture that really results in a loss of connection between our work and its greater meaning, finding meaning in our work. So what do you believe contributes to that cultural disconnection? Why does it matter?
Right. So when Industrial Revolution happened, and for good reason, it created this mechanism that created human beings as part of that mechanism. So efficiency and purposefulness and utility became the assumed parameter, through which we judge our work. And there's, understandably, that's measurable, and so we measure our lives by how productive we have been, how much things we can put on our resumes, and companies, their bottom line is measured by how much profit they make and so forth. And inherently, that's how it works in the world. But what we are losing is a humanity that longs for this extravagance, and it flows out of love. When you love somebody, it's no longer about efficiency or about utility. When you love somebody, you waste time together, and you do things that are extravagant. You do things that are that value that person rather than how much resumeable activities you had on that day. That's it's not important, but it's not the essence of what the relational reality is. And the Bible tells us God is love, and God stands outside of time and space. In other words, outside of the materialist universe in which we are driven by this mechanistic, valuation. So God, in that sense, doesn't need us or the creation. So why did God create? This is the beginning of my book. And the answer is God created because God is love. And love is extravagant and gratuitous. It moves beyond utility and purpose. And utility and purpose included in that love. But if we forget the origin of purpose, which is this love has this exuberant margins that it creates that that does not make sense at times, right? So you see this in nature, you see this in places that human beings will never see. In the deep, if you do a deep ocean dive and you see all these spectacles of beautiful creatures that nobody sees, or even you look into a microscope, you see so much beauty in a single flake of snow. And why is the world created so extravagantly and beautifully and even unnecessary beautifully? And so that's an indication of the creator creating out of sheer love and sheer understanding that because God is not just the source of beauty, God is beauty. Everything God creates is beautiful. And so this is fundamentally something that we have began to lose in industrial mindset. And this purposefulness, which is again not a bad thing in its own, but it's limited in understanding the true nature of humanity and the fullness of humanity.
Mm. As you're speaking, it makes me think about times in my life when I was probably more attuned to the beauty around me than maybe I am right now, or than I am very often. Yeah. And I was thinking about when I am so aware of the beauty, it feels big. There's great, I don't know, weight or yeah, there's that feeling that it's just so big. I can't hold it and I don't really know what to do with it. And I think I'm trying to think of like, how did I handle that? I think that there was a form of artistic expression that allowed me to be able to handle that. Whereas now when my life might be a little more utilitarian, I avoid it because I don't have the same time to devote to handling it. Does that make sense? Am I crazy?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're all artists until third grade, we
or until we take on a lot of other responsibilities.
We are told that that's not important. You're imagining things, or there are more important things to do than to dance when you're joyful. Right. And so we learn, our society teaches us very efficiently that art is a fluff, and it's nice when you have extra time and extra money, but it's not going to help you to survive. So grow up and get used to it, right? But the problem is, you might be very successful doing that, but at some point, like you're saying, this sense of grandeur comes back to us, because that is exactly how the Holy Spirit wants to draw us to the most enduring things. We could have all the success and accomplish all the things that we set out to do, build our resumes and impress people. But at the end of the day, those things mean nothing to us. When you look back on your life, and let's say we're on our deathbeds and we're thinking back to the most important experiences of our lives, it's not the resume. It's not, it's these intangibles that we have experienced through our loved ones, or moments when this grandeur hits us, and we cannot explain it. And we even art, as focused as I am on that, it's only a beginning. My book is only a beginning into understanding how gracious and how impossible this grandeur is to capture. So that longing, what C.S. Lewis called the weight of glory, right? This heaviness, should affect us every day. But as you noted, we seem to ignore that and run away from it at times because we don't know how to handle it. And but I don't think it takes much to tap into that every day. And it's a kind of a discipline that would only require, Emily Dickinson had only one desk, 17 and a half by 17 and a half inches cherrywood desk in her bedroom facing the street of Amherst. And that's what she wrote, with a lamp, and nobody knew she was writing poems. And I sometimes think that, we don't need a studio, or we don't need anything but that little desk that is dedicated to expressing the longings and the glory that we experience. And she woke up at 3:30 in the morning so that she can be baking at 5:30 to take care of her mother. And that means that she didn't have too much time to write. She sacrificed her sleep to wake up and face that, work on her poems. And it wasn't for publishing, it wasn't for job. Nobody thought, they knew about her baking, but they didn't know about her poetry. Um, so it became this very much a dedication to the grandeur that you're speaking of, and the pain, and all that is there in life. And I think those moments and those small gestures can be very significant.
I would imagine that they are significant even with purpose of some kind. So, so why should we tap into that? Why shouldn't we run away from it?
Yeah, because it'll catch up to us at some point. And I think that's part of theology and new creation. It's not anything that we have to do. We're not required to create. We're not required to dance. We're not required, but it is what makes us human beings. So we actually have the privilege on this side of eternity to create into the next. God wants us to understand that it was through God's sacrifice of God's Son to come and embody the divine, fully divine, into our humanity. And then after that, it becomes an invitation toward the banquet. This is a feast that is coming, and we are to be preparing for that. And the way to prepare for a feast, I always joke that we are wedding planners. We're planning for cosmic wedding to come. What do you do when you're planning for a wedding for a friend? Well, you run around, try to find the best music, best art, best, food, best everything, right? And you try to understand the bride and the bridegroom to the best of your ability to serve them. And you in a sense waste time, right? The practicality of getting married is all you have to do is take a vow. So why do you have this extravagance? Why do you have this extra stuff? And why do you have a community around it who come up about you, your family and your loved ones and your friends? It's all because there's a weight of glory there. There's beauty there. There's something that we all long to be part of. It's a narrative that is, echoing from eternity into our hearts, and something rings true when you see that, and when you experience it, you're part of it. And that's what art is. Art is fundamentally poetry, dance, music. They're all part of this way, that path toward that transcendence, toward that, the feast that is to come, toward this banquet that is already, we are to prepare as we live our lives, as we try to survive, as we face our reality all around us, scarcity around us.
You talk about we're not human doings, we're human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that distinction. I mean,
yeah, that's from my mentor, Nigel Goodwin in UK. He's an Shakespearean actor who would always remind artists, you are human beings, not a human doings. So it's a beautiful line to remember.
There seems to be an increasing culture shift
Mm.
in mindset as both businesses and customers want to do more than just meet a transactional need. I mean,
Yeah.
they are more aware of the desire to
Yeah.
contribute to this greater need, especially right now. I think everybody is a little more aware that everybody's on edge. People are
Yeah.
struggling. You
Mhm.
stated that while reductionism is dissatisfying, defining good alternatives is challenging. For
Yes.
those who are in business who find themselves pressed to meet the bottom line to stay in business, how can they work in ways that really honor both the need for productivity and greater meaning that is really that making versus doing perspective?
Yeah. So it's not either or, it's not either survival and love. It's both and, right? And that's but we create these dichotomies all the time, these false binaries. So it becomes about issue of this versus that. You have, as if we assume that everything is limited. We live in a limited resource environment. There was some game, the Darwinian survival. So we have to, choose between love and success. Well, that's there's nothing saying that's the case, because the greatest success is the ability to be able to define that success yourself.
Mm.
Right. So if you can understand success not as the society or the world deems it, but as you determine that, and you create your own path into that. Now you could be a CEO of Amazon, and this would be true for him. As it would be for a postal worker. What is the meaning that we are to bring into this life? And I argue that transcendence and that meaning is far more important to seek out. And as you note, the business communities are getting to be very aware that we used to say, well, empathy would be, you don't want empathetic people in a workplace because it's a competitive place. Well, Adam Grant of Wharton began to take data on actual businesses and bottom lines, and he found that companies with highest empathy does the best. Because they have this invisible capital built into the communal ways that company employees feel that they are being loved at their workplace. Even in sports, right? San Antonio Spurs have multiple championships without a superstar. Why is that? Because they have the highest empathy level, not just in the team, but in the company. So that proves really that something called empathy, which was dismissed, even 20 years ago, is now companies are looking at and saying, well, is there something to this? My daughter is an organizational psychologist, so
no wonder.
She's the one with data,
You're speaking my language.
Yeah. So, but it's really fascinating to me. So is beauty the same way? Not cosmetic beauty, but beauty of something that endures. Isn't it something that every company would want to have for their employees? Certainly, as at least this level of like, for example, right? If you work in a company, and if another company has the same pay for the same work, but the office building is beautiful, as opposed to your company, which the office building is really ugly, there are no windows, which would you rather work for? Obviously, you work for the beautiful company, because you feel better at the end of the day, and you're able to perhaps have a better interaction with your customers and with your employees. And so that's kind of obvious, right? That when you put it starkly like that, but we choose as if we don't have that choice every day. So we end up being trapped in a situation where there is no beauty. There's no beauty, and yet you feel like you're trapped and you cannot make that choice. The reality is even with this severe downturn, actually the severe downturn is an opportunity to create something out of the margins today. So it's actually important for us to be thinking about that now, because even though we're struggling, some of us are struggling to pay rent and so forth, but it's also created enormous momentum to think about what a new wineskin is in business, and what is it that we want, what is our goal. And it's a good time to be thinking about that, because we do have that opportunity coming up.
Pain is so interesting because it is something that we run away from, push back on, and yet it seems to me to be one of the biggest catalysts for beautiful change, as you're talking about.
Yeah.
We have to reimagine. We get to reimagine.
Yeah.
It calls on our sense of creativity. It calls on that piece of us that says, you know what, maybe it isn't all just the way it is. It isn't. It is what it is. Maybe we could do something differently. Maybe we could do something better.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah. Whatever that means. Yes.
So it's easy to think of the brokenness of the world and the challenges that we face in our work as really darkness that presses in on us, pain. A guest that we spoke with a few weeks ago talked about it really as that grind that we experience in work, but you really flip that image and describe light as actually being a boundary for darkness. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So it's interesting theologically, and Lisa Sharon Hopper, a friend of mine who wrote this book about Genesis, she was talking about it, and she's an African American, and argues that darkness was in the beginning, and therefore darkness is, just as good as light. I mean, there's no, and we have this propensity to label things, and that struck me as something of a blind spot, so even for me. So I began to think about that. And what if darkness was beautiful and full of mystery and possibilities, and God dwelled in that? God's original home was darkness. And yeah, because God is love, God created light basically for us, right? It's just this gratuitous gesture of creating a world, a universe in which the light source is fundamentally the source of everything. And then, we think about Jesus being the light, and how the new creation will not require this physical light, but this light of Christ shining upon all of us to expose and to refine us. All of that is part of, so when you kind of flip it, so what is darkness to us? Darkness is scary. Darkness is something that we avoid, and because we don't want to think about it, we associate that with death. We associate that with lack of life. But maybe if we understand the darkness as a way toward God rather than away from God, then we began to have this journey every day, an opportunity to understand God's presence in the very dark places that we inhabit. And, sometimes we are forced to be there. And it's not just, deciding that, darkness is good, but it is good. That we don't, it's like, we just have to be open to that possibility of God's presence in what we call darkness. and then the light can become boundaries and definitions of, of everything that we come out as God does in creating. We can't create something out of nothing, but we are invited to create something through our traumas, through our challenges. Seeing every setback as an opportunity to forge something new into the world, and that kind of perspective can really reshape how we view it. It doesn't make trauma any easier, but one thing that a trauma counselor tells us is that you really have to accept that this trauma is not going away. You're not going to get over it. You're not going to become a new person in which you are able to forget this trauma. It's always going to be part of you, and it takes a while to accept that. You want to be over it, you want to run away, or you want to just throw it away. but oftentimes the path to healing is accepting that this wound is going to be always there, but your perspective toward that, in a way you can see through that into the other side of hope.
Again, that idea of pain and how it presents an opportunity. Maybe it's not so bad. I think I was thinking again about the whole idea of the weight of glory, or the weight of the beauty that we were talking about earlier. And I think the other thing that I find myself doing in release of that is tears. Is just tears. And for a long time, I felt like I shouldn't cry, or I didn't want to cry around other people, for sure.
Yeah.
But then I think once I started to cry and be okay with some tears, I realized it wasn't killing me.
Right.
I realized that it actually helped me to sort of ride the wave of grief, if you will, or, it does. I resonate with what you're saying on about this darkness, that maybe it's something that we could embrace a little bit too. Another person that has been hugely influential for me is Dr. Larry Crabb, who's a psychologist, and he actually just passed away. But hugely influential for me. And I remember some of what he talked about being, it's not so much the pain itself that ends up being so painful. It's our response to the pain.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And, I talk about Jesus wept in the book. That's actually the central thesis throughout the book. But, I found out when in my trip to Israel that they actually have tear jars, from time, because tears are valuable. And we have a culture where we hide our tears and we remain stoic, and as you experience, maybe we embarrassed by our tears. But thank God that Jesus wept openly and in front of his friends. And I think that shows that why would a Son of God who can resurrect Lazarus weep? Waste time weeping. He has all the power to heal, all the power to bring right the wrong. Yet he felt deeply the wrong, the suffering and anger that all of us feel. And Dr. Crabb is right that it's our response that can either stop that process from happening for whatever the reason, or maybe run away from it. And that's the worst thing you can do, because trauma will come to haunt you in some way, in a bigger wave of emotions that you can't handle, and that you almost have to shut down at that point. But if you can weep, and if you have community around you that can weep with you, that is the path to healing. And we really in this time, after 2020 and now 21, everybody is carrying lament and sorrow in ways that they cannot understand yet. And I experienced this after 9/11. It takes a while, 20 years later, I'm still finding these fractures in my life that I didn't know were there. And it gets triggered by things that, are unexpected at times. But, again, you go back to what you just said, which is, if I'm able to weep about those things, if I'm able to be honest and set it as kind of like a care and stone, that is always going to be there, but it can be a marker, and you are able to walk, beyond it. It's another path, and that becomes sort of a marker. I say in the book, toward actually the new creation, because Jesus's wounds are still with him in post-resurrection appearance. So that there's something profound about that, that by his wounds we are healed. And it's through his wounds that the new creation comes. So by logic, I think our wounds too are significant, as part of Christ, what Christ suffered for us. So that can kickstart a kind of a journey that we can encourage each other in our communities to be on.
All right. So as we're kind of facing this great divide in our nation,
yeah,
the United States anyway, what's important for those who want to approach culture from a perspective of caring really for that common good, rather than warring over different values?
Yeah. So cultural care is undergirded by Theology of Making. And basically, cultural care came out of my advocacy for artists and arts in the United States. And I used to lecture a lot in museums and public spaces. And I always had theological undergirding to go with whatever I was saying. If I was advocating for modern dancers, I talk about the sacrifice that goes into a single leap, and that sacrifice, of course, is related to love, because agape love is sacrifice. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from the Bible, and so forth. So I used to think, and I do still to this day, that Galatians 5, understanding of the fruit of the Spirit that Paul talks about, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control, are qualities that we should seek to manifest in culture. So the indictment is, if we ask somebody out there who is not a Christian, outside of the church, about the church, what words would you use to describe us? Instead of love, we have hatred. Instead of joy, we seem to be rather anxious. Instead of peace, we seem to be determined to fight our culture wars. And it's rather indicting. And when you're out there speaking, and I wasn't speaking in behalf of the church, but I felt like, this is fundamentally the fruit that we have born into culture as people who birthed Western civilization and all the beautiful art and music. we are not stewarding what we do very well to be a blessing to just anybody, and even if you are an atheist, you hate the church, you hate God, there's something about the arts that reminds us of the grandeur, the longing that we have for transcendence. So, part of it is not even an argument. I'm not arguing against culture wars. I understand that there are times when you have to defend your turf. There are times for war and there are times for peace. But culture care is really looking at culture as an ecosystem to steward, a garden to tend to. And if you're gardening, with your neighbor who happens to, be of different political, interest, and maybe the total opposite of who you are, all you care about is this neighbor able to create good tomatoes, and we should taste the fruit first before we argue about how we got there. So we should taste the omelet first before we argue about the recipe. If the omelet is good, then let's learn the recipe. If the tomato is good, let's learn from this person the fruitfulness of that, delicious tomato, how that person made it, because we need to learn from that person. It really doesn't matter how that person voted, what kind of background that person has. It's all we should care about is the tomato.
Mm-hmm. This has been such a lovely conversation. I've really, really enjoyed this. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask you our final question here in a second. But before I do that, where can people find your book? Where can they find your artwork?
Yeah, so my book can be ordered through Yale Press or Amazon or whatever, local bookstores is probably the best way. Just ask them to order some. My work is, if you're on social media of any kind, thanks to my daughter, I'm in all of them, most of them at least. So you can find me anywhere. And when I have my exhibits, I do post them on my Twitter and Instagram. So feel free to follow me there. And I'm just so grateful for readers and people who I have been able to converse with, including yourself, that has reached out to me. And when I as an artist, I consider communication to be impossible. So any kind of response, it seems miraculous to me. Like, oh, you actually read my book. that's thing,
I feel the same way. I always do. I have that same reaction. Right? Anytime somebody says they read my book, really?
Any meaningful, I know any meaningful reaction is like plus, and so I really appreciate this, and I really appreciate the readers who care about these things.
Okay. For those who want to have a voice of influence, especially creative people who often feel sidelined by this sort of utilitarianism or this, what is your advice?
Yeah. So this, I talk about 3 G's of generative living in culture care, and they are creating genesis moments. And the second one is generosity, and third is generational thinking. But the second one, generosity, I always it's an exaltation for artist types, because artists are, conscripted on front lines of culture wars, and they feel the scarcity. I say artists are the canaries of coal mines of culture, and they smell the poison and sing. And they're the first to realize and be affected by the toxic air. I know how that is. And yet I have seen so many artists in the front lines and in hidden places being extraordinarily generous. These, we have the capacity to lead in generosity in the world. And I think that quality should be recognized as part of our education and part of our leadership structures, because if encouraged, artists can be the most generous group of people, and that's like very powerful, because a lot of these people, as you and I know, are struggling. They're faced with scarcity reality, but they're never they're never poor in that sense, because they have something to give out of nothing, and they can create something from very little, and that's a quality that, especially going forward, we will need in the society. And I have seen that in lives of artists, Christians and non-Christians. They are people that I look up to as people of generosity, and so I would ask all artists to be generous, because I know they are, and I know they can be.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation, for your books, for your art, and for being a voice of influence for our listeners today.
Thank you, Andrea.